Hi everyone, welcome to Season 3, Episode 21 of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Today's guest is Jane Dancaster. Jane is currently the Managing Director of Wimbledon School of English, one of the UK's top English language schools. She started her EFL career about 35 years ago and has worked in ELT and management in the UK and around the world in organisations ranging from a cooperative school to a well-known group. Jane was chair of English UK London for 15 years and has recently retired from the board of English UK, where she had been a trustee since 2004. She cares passionately about the ELT industry and is actively involved in supporting and promoting English language teaching. I chat to Jane about Wimbledon School of English, Brexit, COVID, and the future of ELT in the UK. I hope you enjoy the podcast.
Hey everyone, buckle up for a new episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast, the one and only podcast made to help you launch your business or take your existing business to a level of success you could never have imagined. Whether you're a school owner, freelancer, publisher, or other entrepreneur, you're sure to pick up lots of actionable advice when you listen to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Remember to visit eflmagazine.com for great articles and features. Without further ado, here's your host, the founder of EFL Magazine, Philip Pound.
Hello, welcome back everybody to the latest episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast, and I'm delighted to have our guest Jane Dancaster, and Jane is the CEO of Wimbledon School of English. Did I get that correct so far?
So, managing director.
Managing
the CEO,
director, sorry.
The CEO is actually the daughter-in-law of our founder, but she's not very active. So I'm like the CEO. I'm
Great.
the active senior manager.
Gotcha. And just at the right time, someone tries to call you. So, yeah. And you're also director of English UK.
Until recently, yes, I was a trustee of English UK. I've been a trustee for English UK for about 18 years with a couple of gaps. But actually, that finished a few weeks ago because I had reached the end of my time as a trustee of English UK. But I know English UK pretty well. I know the UK environment pretty well as well. And I'm still a member of the English UK London committee. So still part of that.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I'm looking at your office and you have a tennis racket and a tennis ball and you're called Wimbledon School of English. So you're in Wimbledon.
Absolutely. Yeah, we are right in the centre of Wimbledon, about 3 minutes walk from Wimbledon station. And everyone's getting very excited because the championships, they are every year from the beginning of July, so not long now. Wimbledon will be full of famous faces and lots of very, very sporty people and a really good party atmosphere. It's a good time to come.
It's a good time to come. Is it a good place to have an ELT school?
It's a perfect place to have an ELT school because Wimbledon is one of London's best areas, as a lot of you probably know. It's a very rich area full of professional families, lots of green spaces, great facilities. We've got a big shopping centre, 2 theatres, cinemas, sports clubs, lots of bars, cafes and restaurants. So it's a really, really nice place for students to study and live.
Okay, and I know things are very busy in the UK at the moment. You just mentioned that just before the podcast, so we'll talk about that in a second. But tell me a little bit about the history of the school, how you got started, and where you are now.
So the school is, and sadly, it's not my school. It's owned by the Housden family. So the school was started in 1964 by Mrs. Marjorie Housden, who noted that the au pairs that were working in Wimbledon needed somebody to help them with their language lessons. Marjorie was an English teacher and she started teaching the au pairs in her kitchen. And they soon moved to new premises in Wimbledon Village, and we moved down here to where we are now in 1975. So we're one of the oldest schools in the UK. And we also ranked number 1 out of all British Council accredited UK schools and have been every year since 2014. So we're pretty well established in the UK ELT world.
Okay, in 1975 was a vintage year, of course, being the year that I was born. But
I wasn't teaching English then, I tell you, but I actually did my CELTA at International House in 1983. So I have been teaching but I'm not teaching anymore. I've been in the industry for far too long.
okay, you've been in the industry for far too long, so that's a good segue to get into how you started off in the industry and what took you into English language teaching.
So I'm an arts graduate from Sussex University, and at Sussex, you do a multidisciplinary degree. So although I graduated in art history, you also do English, philosophy, other things. And I wanted to work in the arts world, but it was quite tricky in those days. I struggled to get a decent job. And so I was doing summer work in the south of France, selling ice cream on the beaches for somebody that made his own organic ice cream, so scoop ice cream, none of your ice lolly nonsense. And I fell in love with France. I fell in love with the French. I did 5 seasons there. And after one of the seasons, I used the huge amount of money I'd made selling ice cream. It was very lucrative to pay to do the TEFL certificate at International House in London. And after that, I went back to France, and there we are. That's how I got into it. A love of travel, a love of the French. That was what took me into teaching. Then I found, stayed in France for a few years, had an interesting time there. And when I came back to the UK, aiming to try again in the arts and media world, I found that world wasn't, the people working in mainstream jobs, they weren't as friendly and open and free thinking as people in our industry. So I actually came back into our industry because it's a lovely industry to work in. I like working with international. I like the mentality of the kind of people that go into teaching English. It's a very warm, open industry. It's not a dog eat dog, everybody scrambling over everybody else to get promotion kind of industry. So I decided it was a good place to be.
Okay, excellent. So that was your choice to get into the industry, and you started off. You took your TEFL cert, and you started off as a teacher. And did you then get into director of studies, management? What was your career path?
So I worked in France, as I said, for a few years, and we ended up actually going on strike, getting the sack, and taking our employers to a tribunal and winning our court case for illegal working conditions in France. So that was in the 80s, and after that, I came back to the UK, and as I said, but I worked in a co-operative school for a while. So we ran our own school in Tottenham Court Road in London, and I learned a lot doing that. So I was a teacher until the end of the 80s, and then I came to Wimbledon School of English as Director of Studies in around 1990. Then I left and went to Bell as Head of Studies at Bell London, and then I came back here as Principal in 1999. So I've moved around a little bit, but not a huge amount. So it was France, a few different jobs there, co-op school, Wimbledon, back to the co-op school, actually, back to Wimbledon, Bell, Wimbledon. So rather a lot of Wimbledon, 3 times. This is my 3rd time here. So I've done the traditional path from teacher to manager, but I did do a master's in education management along the way. So I learned all the important bits about running a business.
Okay, so pretty stable for someone in ELT. It's, the traditional idea of an ELT person would be, they're footloose and they itchy feet, wanderlust and travel around the world, take in different cultures, learn different languages, then come back. So yours was pretty stable.
It was pretty stable. I stayed in the UK because along the way I had a baby. These things sort of usually settle down a bit, and that changes things slightly, particularly if your partner isn't footloose and fancy free and able to travel the world with you. So I think I would have continued traveling if that hadn't happened, to be honest. That was what I wanted to do. But I was very lucky to end up working for some really good organizations. I was very lucky to have permanent jobs, which, as you know, isn't always the case, with reasonable pay and conditions and all the rest of it. So I think I've worked in some really good organizations. And when we ran our own school, that we learned everything. We did everything ourselves. So we did sales, marketing, admin, teaching, the whole lot. So that was a huge learning curve when I was a fairly novice teacher at that point. So I think that was a really good foundation.
Okay, and that kind of anticipates my next question, because I planned to ask it a little bit down the line, but actually, as you mention instability and poor wages, and you coming from France at that time, I think co-travail is it? They're very, very strict, very uh, about the codes and how long people can work for, and it can be to the employee's benefit or not, or the employer's benefit or not. Sometimes co-travail, but things are a lot looser, of course, in the UK now over the past 10 years with gig economy and less stable part-time work. So, what would you have to say about how things have changed in the industries from when you started to now?
Sorry about the phones. I can't turn them off
Oh,
or
no
hidden.
problem. I can, yeah.
So, as I said, I have been lucky, I think, in the places where I have worked. So, for example, here at Wimbledon, we always have a core team of permanent salaried staff. We don't have lots and lots and lots of teachers on 0 hours contracts. We believe in as best paying conditions as we can provide, and we believe in permanent staff. It's so much better for the teachers' individual development, for the school, for the profile of the school, for people's learning and the historical knowledge, etc., etc. So I have always worked in places where I have had secure paying conditions. However, the industry, as you know, is not well known for that. And when I was younger, there were a lot of staff who were employed as so-called self-employed staff, which meant basically that their employers didn't pay their national insurance or tax. That became illegal. The government cracked down on that. That was no longer possible. It's a difficult industry because we are seasonal. So of course we also employ temporary teachers here as well in the summer, particularly. So it is a seasonal industry and it is difficult for people, and I do appreciate that. But I hope that things are better now, but I can't speak for the other schools because that's really not the kind of information that we share. I know that there are quite a few schools operating with teachers on 0 hours, but at the moment in the post-COVID world, schools are on their knees. So they absolutely can't, they probably can't afford to do other than that. They can't afford to have staff who might not be teaching all their teaching hours. I mean, when I was in France, the reason we went to a tribunal, went on strike, was we were expected to be disponible, we were expected to be free from 8 in the morning till 8 in the evening, Monday to Friday, and on Saturday mornings with no guaranteed income of any sort whatsoever, which is why the government work inspector came in and said this is completely illegal, and which is why we won the tribunal. So things have certainly improved since then. So even with French employment laws, things weren't great. Now, I think that the profile of the industry is definitely improved. I mean, we were a cottage industry 20 to 30 years ago, and we're not now. I mean, most of the schools are owned by global organizations, big players. I hope that we are now acknowledged as being a professional industry with qualified, highly experienced, trained staff who are dedicated professionals, because this idea that, I met somebody, they did that when they were traveling around Chile, or it's just a dodgy shop above a chip shop, that kind of idea, I hope has gone now, because certainly in the UK and from my colleagues in Canada, Australia, South Africa, the States, who I talk to quite a lot, Malta, Ireland, we are solid professional organizations. So yes, we're mature.
Okay, excellent. So, as I mentioned, the employee side of things, I want to talk about the schools, and you did a very good job of, outlining what conditions are like for schools at the moment. We've had a number of shocks. You in UK Brexit, of course, the pandemic, maybe Ukraine as well, and, currency fluctuations as well, and, cost of living crises and everything thrown on top. So can you give me a thumbnail of, if a thumbnail is possible, of where the industry has been over the past 6 years since Brexit, and what's happening, and where do you envisage the opportunities in the industry and opportunities for growth and rebounding?
So Brexit undoubtedly had a negative effect on the UK industry from the moment that it happened. So from 2016, when the Brexiteers won the vote, because of uncertainty. So there was a lot of fear. There was fear about what might happen, even when Brexit hadn't actually happened. And Brexit, didn't happen for a while. There was fear, and people didn't want to come to the UK. They thought they might get a hostile response. There were all these scare stories about food shortages, or people not being allowed in, or no medical treatment, or all sorts of things. There was fear. Then when the reality finally hit, it sort of coincided with COVID. So it's only now that we are beginning to see how very damaging Brexit has been. And it is incredibly damaging. So we have lost a lot of our European students for all sorts of reasons. So the fear factor is still there. There's we do everything we can to tell people what's happening, but they are still frightened. They're still frightened and worried about things. But they can get in without visas. They can come in. It's really easy. They're allowed to come in for up to 6 months. Of course, they can get medical treatment, etc. But there's still that fear factor. But there are some actual concrete barriers that are now in place. One of them is the passport issue. So you can't come into the UK on an ID card anymore. And in Europe, it's perfectly normal to travel around the whole of Europe on your ID card. So you don't need to buy a passport. So why bother to go to that expense and the long wait, etc. Particularly for our junior groups, so the groups that come to the English language schools and the summer groups, but also not just our sector, but mainstream education. They take a lot of groups of teenagers throughout the year, educational visits and so on. No longer possible. All that has stopped. That's a loss of millions. And English UK is working with the UK tourism industry on this. So there's a campaign going on this, to see if we can get collective passports or some kind of concessions to let groups of teenagers into the UK. They're hardly a threat if they're coming in with their teacher. They're not likely to abscond. I mean, there's this fear in the UK always that everybody coming in is a potential illegal immigrant and their real aim is to come and live and work in the UK permanently. Yeah. So the other thing is the loss of the Erasmus programme. We had many teachers coming in on teacher training programmes, and the UK decided to leave Erasmus and they set up their own special programme, but that's only for people going out of the UK. It's not for people coming in. So that's a huge loss as well for the teacher training and other training programmes. It wasn't just for teachers. And also interns. We all used to work with interns. It was great having them here. They can't come any longer. So that takes me on to the other difficulty of Brexit, which is employment. We can't employ anybody at all. We can't even employ, our students aren't allowed to work in the UK at all. If they're at university, they can, but in our sector, no work allowed. So not even 5 hours a week in a coffee shop just to get a bit of English language conversation. Not even voluntary work, 5 hours a week in a coffee shop. We used to employ students here to do little bits and pieces that they enjoyed, so taking the tennis students out or the football students or working in the coffee shop, or not allowed. And I think that is a huge negative for the students. They don't necessarily need the money, but they like that integration. They come to the UK and other language destinations for that total immersion in the language. And finding a part-time job for many of them was part of that and part of the fun. And I've done that abroad as well. And I can see that. It's enjoyable. It's completely different. You feel part of the community and you're giving something back. So, Brexit is horrible, I think.
Wow.
That's a big one.
Yeah, that is a big one. That's just Brexit. But by your intonation, by your body language, I think it's not just the red tape. It's the, let's say, xenophobia that people are afraid of. Yeah. And I, once they're here, of course it's in their minds. It's not the British public have no problem at all with overseas students. They don't see overseas students as nasty immigrants coming in to steal their jobs, which I think was one of the things behind the Brexit vote. They see students as just students that come in and spend money and might be slightly irritating, in nightclubs or queuing for something, but they're just students along with other students. So we don't see that actually on the ground here. So it's all to do with perception. It's perception of the UK as being a xenophobic island that doesn't want anybody to
cross the water and come in, which isn't true, of course. We love everybody. We want them to come, especially in London. London is such a multicultural environment. That's one of the joys of living in London, having so many different cultures here, access to so much wonderful food and creativity and all these other things that we benefit from here.
Sure, and I didn't mean to imply that the great British people were xenophobic, but I think it's the optics, isn't it? I mean, a lot of people here, students in Japan, for example, if they see a terrorist attack in France or UK, and they're like, "Oh, I would never travel to the UK because this isolated rare attack happened, in one small part of the country." So it's That's it's just negative publicity, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So and then of course we had COVID.
Yes, exactly. And I was coming along to that, and I suppose with the Brexit thing, COVID kind of covered that. It was perfect for a lot of Brexiteers and apologists for Brexit, wasn't it? It was like, oh, it's all COVID. It's none of it is Brexit. And through the haze and the obfuscation, it was easy enough to make that argument, and and they have their channels that they use, their newspapers, but that now. Even today I was watching, I think on YouTube, there's an ITV report about the fishing industry has been, in the southeast of England, the south coast. And I think fishermen were like the biggest supporters of Brexit, weren't they? Because of the common fisheries policy. But now, of course, they have to employ extra people to do the forms, and every day it's such a cumbersome process. And I think one big supporter turned around and he says, the reporter said, "Do you regret it?" And he said, "Absolutely. I regret voting for it." So, we're beginning to see. And of course, ELT and foreign students, that's going to be what most affected, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's not just Brexit, it's our government chose a hard Brexit. So no free movement of people. So, for example, Switzerland isn't in the EU, but it's in the EEA, and there is free movement of people. So we didn't want free movement of people. So, the fishing industry, they feel betrayed, I think, by the government, to be honest.
Exactly.
But there are a lot of people who are still very pro-Brexit, I have to say.
Oh, certainly. Unrepentant, about the whole thing. But I did say, actually, one of the Brexiteers, Daniel Hannan, isn't it? He said during the week that actually there shouldn't have been a hard Brexit. Basically, he regretted that. So who's to say what will happen in the future? But anyway, on to more happy news. The pandemic. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So already the industry was struggling a little bit, to be honest. Our numbers weren't huge, and the heady days of the early 2000s, had gone, and then along comes COVID, absolute disaster for our industry. I can't remember what percentage of schools have closed permanently. I should have had those stats at my fingertips, but I think it's slightly lower than we had anticipated. I think it's about 17% of UK English language schools have closed permanently, but I'd have to check that with English UK. So that's not, that's my guess.
I was going to ask you for a guess anyway, but you've kindly given me one. 17%. Yeah. Wow.
That one. So, but I mean, we, for example, lost 80% of our business through the 2 years of the pandemic, and when once it first happened, when we went into lockdown, there was very little warning. We'd been watching it happening in other countries, and our government was prevaricating, but we were ready for it. We were already teaching using Zoom, which to me was this alien, unheard of thing that a couple of our very clever teachers knew how to use, because we teach medical professionals around the world. We prepare them for the OET, which is an exam they need in order to practice in quite a few countries, including the UK and Australia. So we already knew how to use Zoom. So we set up Zoom training for our teachers before lockdown. So when lockdown happened, everybody had a laptop, everybody had the Zoom training, and we were able to seamlessly move our classes online. But online teaching for the client and also for the teacher, of course, is a very different product. So we, with our students, we offered them move online or have a credit for your courses, and we've kept extending the credit. So we've still got people coming back now taking the credit. And we also started selling online programs. So we carried on working throughout the pandemic, and we stayed open, and except for the actual lockdown. So for months at a time, we would have maybe 20 students in school rather than 250, but we still carried on. But the online teaching environment, the online teaching market is completely different. It's dominated by huge players, Microsoft, Google, Duolingo, etc., etc. And there's this perception that online courses should be free or very cheap, that they're not high quality and so on. We were doing synchronous face-to-face online teaching, so real life teacher there teaching you group work, pair work, all the rest of it, follow up, homework, and so on and so forth. So our costs were still quite high, and it worked well. I have to say that we thought at one point we would continue with the online, and we also did hybrid teaching at the times when we were open. So we had bodies in class and people joining remotely, and we ran all sorts of different courses. We had online junior summer camps, we had online social activities, we had people cooking, and so somebody making apple pie and a family in Saudi Arabia making apple pie with them, and this was lovely, great community feeling, kept everybody going, kept everybody motivated. But when things started to open up a bit more, we realized that people had had enough of online. They really didn't want Zoom classes. They wanted to come back. And then the problem was COVID again, and government restrictions on travel. And I'm not saying whether they were right or wrong, because, I don't have access to the data that they have on COVID. But certainly there was a yo-yo system in the UK where 1 minute people could come in, then they couldn't come in, then there was a red light, and then a green light, then an amber light, and nobody knew what was happening. And that you couldn't plan anything at all. And that also was a big deterrent. So it was terrible times, and quite a few people understandably left the profession, because our industry, we don't fit into any category. So I think a lot of people thought we were like mainstream education. We still had money coming in, and the public schools, the private independent school sector in the UK, they still had the fees from those students. Well, we didn't. We didn't, because our students come for short term. We didn't have a whole year's fees to play with. So we didn't have money coming in, and we didn't have access to the same grants and things at the beginning as hospitality, retail, and tourism, because we were just kind of left out. So we didn't really get much support, and some of it was regional. So it was up to your local council to decide, for example, whether you still had to pay business rates, which are the rates we pay on our buildings. So we still had to pay all our rent on our buildings. We still had to pay the rates. The good thing was we got furlough, which meant we could keep our staff employed. So that was a good thing, that those that weren't actually teaching. But a lot of our staff worked all the way through. We had to keep admin staff going. We still had clients all the time asking questions and so on. We still had to do our finances. So our staff have been amazing, but now they are exhausted. They've just been working flat out. And now we've got a sudden, amazing, wonderful resurgence in interest, but it's as if a whole year has been packed into 1 month. Everybody wants to come in July. We're full. We can't take any more people in July. Fabulous. After July, not quite so sure, but things are getting better, so that's good. But a lot of people are still paying 2020 prices. Not fabulous. We have big inflation in the UK, as I think the world does at the moment. So things are much better. I'd say now we're at 60% of capacity. This is great, but there's still so much uncertainty, which is out of our control.
Yeah, there's so much uncertainty with Brexit. There's so much uncertainty about the fashion about online. So you mentioned about online. Do you think online is dead and buried? It will come back. There will be a hybrid model, or it will, it'll be the domain of some of the bigger players. Are there still opportunities for the regular school, brick and mortar school, to run online programs?
And it still works, for example, with one-to-one. So if you're a busy executive, you don't have much time, online is great. So online one-to-one, will continue as far as we're concerned. And our online teacher training as well, particularly from my colleagues that do a lot of teacher training courses, such as International House, their online provision is going really well. We do a small amount. We do the Trinity Cert TESOL, and we also found that people who are not based in the UK are interested in doing this teacher training. So, that's not going to be huge business, but there's still business. And a few specialist courses, professional courses, such as our OET. We run those as hybrid. So people can either come, again, they're busy, they're medical professionals, they're working, they can't necessarily come to the UK. But, I'm probably not the one to talk to. If you talk to, the big companies like Kaplan or EF or so on, where they've got, huge departments with all the technology and so on, and they can do different form of online, so asynchronous online, sort of more the mechanistic type online. I'm sure there is a market for that, definitely, but with very narrow margins, I would say. And there's a lot of competition as well for that kind of thing from countries like the Philippines, where they do very cheap synchronous online. So markets for us, such as South Korea and Japan, would choose to do that. And also, obviously, the time difference comes in there as well. So it's there, but the investment needed to do it really well is too much for a small company like ours.
Okay, so it was a kind of a stopgap measure, but still used for certain things. Yeah. Okay. So tell me about English UK. That's a big question.
So English UK is the national professional organisation for the English language sector in the UK. And there used to be two bodies. There was ARLS, which was the private sector, and BASELT, which was the state sector. And then they merged, which made sense, to form one sector in, I think, about 2004. So it's a membership organisation, and it does an awful lot for our industry in terms of lobbying, providing resources for members, providing a complaint system for the students, etc., etc. So it's a really, really worthwhile organisation.
Okay, and tell me of some of the work that you've been involved in over the past few years.
So, well, one of my areas is really what we call the public affairs, which is the lobbying government. So what I've been involved in since about 2004 is working with colleagues at English UK and also civil servants in UK government on visas, because the UK visa regime has changed a lot over the years. So we meet government representatives and we try and persuade them that our view is the right view, to make allowances for students and to, make freedom of movement a bit more possible for our students and to see our students in a positive way rather than a negative way. Early on, I was involved in helping the writing of the visa application forms and so on to try and make them more accessible to clients and so on and so forth. I wouldn't say that they are particularly easy to complete and they still have to be completed in English, but we are still working, we're still lobbying. I'm still a member of the London First, which is a lobbying group that we're members of. I'm still a member of their immigration group. We meet regularly. We meet the Home Office regularly. We have very good, positive, forward-looking, friendly meetings where both sides are trying to support and help each other. So that's the work that I do primarily for English UK, which is raising the profile of our industry with government and trying to make lives easier for schools in the UK and government. So otherwise, English UK does so much. I mean, they provide training in all sorts of things, from safeguarding to marketing, all the legal compliance help and support that you need, sort of general individual support with all sorts of different issues. We've got access to a legal helpline, regular meetings, networking, selling the UK, working with the British Council, working with UK tourism, just to promote the UK, because I'm sure you're aware it's a very, very competitive industry. The UK can't be complacent. We can't say, yeah, we're England or we're Scotland or whatever, so everybody will still want to come here. No, they won't. Malta's cheaper, Ireland is easier, Canada's more exciting, etc. So it's a highly competitive industry, and we really need to keep promoting the UK, which I genuinely believe is one of the most interesting and exciting destinations in the world. And I've travelled a lot. I've been very lucky.
Absolutely, and anybody who's been to the UK will say so. And I'm sure the Canadians will be delighted to hear that they're exciting as well. It's not an adjective I've heard about Canadians, with all due respect, but
maybe not exciting. I was thinking of the landscape, and the access to that beautiful countryside that they have. So yeah, maybe not exciting. We're exciting. Canadians are. I don't know, it's glorious environments in Canada.
Yeah, exactly. Clean air and wide open spaces.
Yeah.
It sounds like I'm thinking of the Monty Python song now, the Lumberjack song, isn't it? Yeah.
I love that song. I'm not sure if we're allowed to still love that song, but that's one of my favorite songs.
Oh yeah, now I remember. Yeah, what you're talking about there. Yeah. So times changed, don't they? But yeah. So it's definitely UK is. It's where English comes from, despite, people saying there are world Englishes, but, it is called English. So, people will want to come to England, want to come to the UK, but, you're at a disadvantage, aren't you, with students? It just really hits home, when you talked about the visa application process, that if I were a student from mainland Europe wanting to study in the UK, I have to fill out a visa form. I'm thinking, oh yeah, that's what people have to do now. They didn't have to do that in the past.
They don't have to do that if they're coming for up to 6 months.
Oh, okay.
Up to 6 months, no visa. It's only courses for longer than 6 months.
I see.
So,
okay.
But they think they have to do it. So,
okay.
We're trying to get that information out. It's a otherwise, they can just come through security and get a stamp in the passport in the same way that we now have to do when we go on holiday. So when we travel to France or Spain or wherever, we have to go through passport control and we get a stamp in our passport now. We have to be stamped in and out.
Yeah, and you have a nice blue passport as well that you can be stamped, and a lot of array of nice looking stamps. So you're
I've still got my maroon European passport, but but it's filling up fast with stamps, so I'm going to have to get a new blue one soon, which is annoying me enormously.
So you talked about your own school, Wimbledon School of English, and things have rebounded, haven't they? There's been a surge. So for somebody who's a school owner, maybe in the UK, maybe further afield, this is it's often difficult to ask a question like this because it's specific to the country, isn't it? And the working conditions, economic environment, etc., and your social strata, and ability to pay for lessons. But if as you say, 17% of schools have gone out of business. Unfortunately, it's always sad to hear that. But are there chances for schools to fill this gap that has, or are there still opportunities in the industry in the UK for new schools, or fledgling schools that are starting out or want to expand?
Well, I think it was an overcrowded marketplace before, to be honest. There are no real barriers to entry, or there weren't. One result of Brexit is that you need some form of accreditation now for students to come in. You didn't need accreditation before for students to come in. So I suppose that's a slight new barrier to entry. There are always schools opening up and they're seeing opportunities. I can't think of any niches where there isn't already a school providing that opportunity. So I think it's really, I wouldn't actually encourage new entrants to the market. I think it's really, really tough. I mean, we talk about the perfect storm in our industry at the moment, and this isn't just the UK. I've got friends in Ireland and in Canada who have the same issues that we do at the moment, which is that there's a staff shortage. The industry has lost people. There are not many new entrants in teaching terms coming in. And there's an accommodation shortage because a lot of us rely on homestay accommodation for part of our accommodation provision. And during the pandemic, people have used that spare room as their working from home office, and they want to continue working from home in their office. They've gone off the idea of having an overseas visitor. So the conditions are really, really tough. The environment is really tough, but I think, things will bounce back going forward. But it's also a time for consolidation and maybe resetting slightly. So perhaps our margins had got narrower and narrower and narrower each year. We work with overseas agents, as I'm sure you know. They are absolutely crucial to our industry, and a good agent is worth their weight in gold. And there's a mutual support system. They're our partners, and we will support each other. But agent commission is getting higher and higher and higher. A lot of the big players are discounting and discounting and discounting, or they were before the pandemic. So it was becoming almost impossible to operate for some schools, which is, the pandemic was probably the last straw that tipped people over the edge, rather than the full cause of people going. So I think we will see fewer cheap courses, to be honest, because it's just not feasible now with the cost of everything that we do going up. So even something small, like we've got a lot of groups coming this summer, as we always do, they're coming in at 2020 prices because they originally booked for then. The transport, the coaches, it's gone up by about 50%, literally, since then. There's nothing we can do about that.
And nobody to drive them. Is that right?
Nobody,
is there still a driver's crisis?
Yeah. Actually, the driver's crisis doesn't seem so bad. That was pre-Christmas, the HGV crisis. That one, I don't know. It's gone out of the news anyway. It's probably still there, but they're not reporting it anymore.
There are worse things, yeah.
Yeah. So Ukraine kind of took over from that one slightly. And, Ukraine, of course, and the conflict, the Russia-Ukraine conflict is just horrific and awful and just so horrible for everybody we know, and all our friends in Ukraine and our friends in Russia as well, because of course, not all Russian people are supporting this conflict. And here at WSC, we have worked with refugees for many years. We work with an organization called RefuAid, and we give full scholarships to refugees that are referred to us from RefuAid. So a refugee will come to us for, say, 1 year, and do all the exams and so on that they need, and RefuAid pay for the exams. We look after the tuition. We provide that completely free. RefuAid help them find accommodation, and then they go on to university, or quite a few of our RefuAid students are older professionals. So one was the chief neurosurgeon in Syria, and he's now working at one of our huge London teaching hospitals. A lot of them actually in the medical profession. So we now have a few refugees from Ukraine via RefuAid, which is great. And we do everything we can to help refugees. And certainly the local communities in the UK are really reaching out to Ukrainians. We've got the Ukrainian family scheme, sort of host to Ukrainian. And that is it's a positive that's coming out of it, but it's just such an awful situation for everybody. I mean, my heart just goes out to them. It's just horrible, but when I meet them and I hear their stories and everything that we see. But yes, that is also impacting our industry, of course. These are major markets that have gone. But in view of what's happening, we put that to one side because that's actually irrelevant exactly. When you've got that human tragedy going on.
So it seems as though in the industry, it's the momentum will go towards the higher end student, as in the student who can afford to pay, because the students that would come on working holidays, work part-time jobs, pay for the courses, they're disqualified by Brexit rules from doing that. So, and the prices have also gone up with the cost of living and electricity, whatever, all the overheads. So it's becoming less affordable for your, I don't know what to say, to be politically correct here, you're maybe middle to lower end student. I don't know what the lingo is here, but it sounds
I don't either, but
yeah,
yes.
Sorry, I'm trying, so sorry for my clumsy effort there. But so you mentioned a lot about professionals, doctors, etc. So that's really where the industry is at the moment.
Well, the professionals and doctors I were talking about were the refugees.
Okay.
So they well, we also teach professionals and doctors, but it was the refugees who don't pay anything at all. And what I think is so interesting, what we learned so much from all our refugees is that, the public image of a refugee is not what refugees are. Refugees are all different types of people, as we all are. Refugees are just a name for, we might, if something went wrong in the UK, I'd be a refugee, we'd all be refugees. So it can be young, old, professional, unskilled, skilled, etc., etc., etc. So, but in terms of where the industry is going, it's very hard to predict. I don't have a crystal ball. There are always professionals who need courses, and we teach them, but they're not always able to come to the UK. There are teachers who need courses, and we teach them. They're not always able to come to the UK now, so that's the online. Everybody always says English is dead. I've been going to sessions on how English is dead since at least 1995. Probably will be dead at some point, but I hope not yet. So luckily for us, it's not quite dead. And although people say general English is dead, and you need to sort of do general English with bells on, you try selling general English with bells on and nobody actually wants it, because what they really need is general English. So, and people still need exams at the moment, which is a great thing for our school, because we really like exams. We think that they give focus and motivation, and we also have a large exam centre here. The London Exam Centre is part of our business. So I can't predict what will happen. Maybe you need to talk to some of the bigger players, the global players who know a little bit more about what's going on in the world. I mean, demographics will affect us, of course. There are fewer young people coming through. We're dealing now with Gen Z, and we've got Gen Alpha. We're looking at what motivates them. Will they still travel? Maybe not, etc., etc., etc. So many factors that affect us. So can't predict. Sorry.
Yeah, Jane. Well, actually, you've sprung a new one on me there. Gen Alpha. That's a term
I think it's Alpha. I think I could be wrong. I have to Google it. I think Alphas are the one after Z, but or Z, as some people call them.
It's gone for full circle, has it, back to the beginning? Yeah. So I heard millennial, but millennial's kind of a catch-all term, isn't it? Really?
Millennials are old now.
Yeah.
My daughter's a millennial. She's 34. So, yeah. So
yeah.
Our average student age here is 26. So they might, I can't remember if that means they are, the at the bottom edge of millennial or the top age of Z, but I think they're probably still just millennials. So, but very different from each generation is different and have different drivers and different needs and wants. I mean, we have noticed that the younger generations are much more fragile in terms of welfare and mental health, and we put a lot of work into taking care of our staff, because obviously our staff are younger, some of them as well, and our students, taking those aspects. They don't appear fragile. They appear very self-possessed and confident, but actually there's a lot going on under the surface there. So
yeah,
that's one of the areas where we really, really need to take care.
That is interesting. I had this discussion with somebody from the Generation X, and we were, what would say, the most postmodern, and what we were kind of irreverent, didn't really care much about politics, and we just wanted like personal freedom, and it's kind of gone more conservative, more puritanical again, isn't it?
Yeah. It's certainly it's much more polarized. I mean, everyone's sort of very black and white, so I'm from the baby boomer generation, which everybody says that we're very rich and we're all sitting around enjoying our wealth. Well, not in our industry, unfortunately, but we were very political. I was super political. I was ultra left, occupied every building at the university, was regularly on picket lines and demonstrations. We were fighting for gay rights, for abortion rights, for all these things. We didn't care about jobs particularly. When we graduated, it wasn't to get a career. All very. I was quite interested when I went to some of the environmental demonstrations that were in London just before COVID. It was just actually like being back at university. The people, it was like, to me, it was like it had gone full circle. The people there were like us in the early 1980s and the late 70s. So what goes around comes around.
That is interesting. Yeah, it's cyclical, isn't it? It's rather than linear. Sometimes I think that one is a reaction, or maybe overreaction, overcorrection of the other, of the previous generation. It's a rebellion. It's like the You've probably seen the meme or the cartoon strip where one is like, for example, from The Doors, Jim Morrison. He came from like a strong military family, didn't he? Became a hippie.
Yeah.
And then there's
Yeah.
been stories of like the children of hippies becoming military officers. And this is
Yeah.
actually the
Yeah.
case, isn't it? So
Yeah. It's the classic
that's
rebellion.
exactly. And it was really interesting that you mentioned the students themselves are more fragile, more sensitive, because if you were to read the Daily Express and the Daily Mail, or some of these newspapers, they would say it's the teachers and it's the education system that is causing this. But from your experience, that's not the case.
No, I think there's so much pressure on younger people today. I mean, social media is, this is my personal opinion. I think it's fair. I suffer from this. I look on social media. I'm on Instagram or whatever. I see all my friends. Everybody is having a perfect life the whole time. They're also thin, beautiful, suntanned, and they never seem to be doing any work. Or if they are working, if they're a rival school, they're successful. Everything is fabulous, and they're absolutely jam-packed with happy students. And I start thinking, oh no, why aren't we like that? Then I get stressed, and then I've actually stopped. I mean, I'm the sort of Facebook generation. I know younger people don't look at that, but I virtually left Facebook because it actually stressed me out and took my time. It was a time stealer. An hour would go by, I'd done absolutely nothing apart from flick through Facebook. But if I were young, when you're so insecure about everything, anyway, you're insecure about your body, about your relationships, about all these things, and then you're faced with that. For example, I think that would be hideous. And then our generation of parents, we were the helicopter parents. So we wrapped our children up in cotton wool and combined with legislation as well, safeguarding legislation. Nobody took any risks at all. When my daughter was at school, they weren't allowed to have winners in sports day. That was banned. Everybody won the race, so that they were protected from real life, which is things aren't like that.
Yes.
So we're partly to blame for this vulnerability, I think.
That's true, isn't it? I was talking to somebody today here in Japan, and it's the same thing. But there's a few stories about what's happening in Japan. But normally this time of the year they have what they call Sports Day. It is what it's Sports Day. They have the school Sports Day usually around this week, beginning second week of June, and some schools don't even have competitive races anymore. They just have all the students join arms, run around the track, and finish together, and everybody wins. So
yeah, same thing. And then when you go into industry, and you're working in an office or something, and everything is competitive. Everybody's competing for that promotion or whatever, or the best sales, and so you're not equipped for the stress that brings. So
yeah,
tricky one.
Yeah, who knows? It'll probably change around again in a few years. It's been going in the direction of safetyism, hasn't it, for the past couple of decades? The book by Jonathan Haidt, the mollycoddling of the American youth, kind of comes to mind, and he talks in the book about. He gives the example of food allergies. That,
yes.
They've rocketed, haven't they? Because one child had a food allergy, so they banned the food in the school. So, like, peanut allergies went up by factors of like 10% or more. And I think now even here in Japan, there's people. I didn't even know people would have allergies to kiwi, for example. The seeds in kiwi people can be allergic to, or there's so many different allergies. So that has happened. That's on record. That's measurable.
That's real. Yeah. I'm actually allergic to figs, which I didn't know. I wasn't allergic to figs, and then you can develop an allergy.
Oh.
And then I had some figs, and I developed a serious allergy. My mother was allergic to strawberries, so maybe the fruit allergy is in the family. So that's your kiwi thing. But yeah, I mean, the allergies are real. I think people are genuinely allergic. But I was reading a really interesting article that was signed by about 50 doctors, which was about sort of perceived food intolerances. So how people without any medical foundation are cutting all sorts of things out of their diet, and how that's actually leading to certain types of deficiency. food deficiency, because we don't really know what we're doing. You read an article, you think, oh yes, I feel a bit funny after eating bread. I'm probably allergic to wheat. You cut out wheat and then you're losing nutrients. So it was very interesting, actually, because it was a scientific view of the whole thing. It wasn't written from any sort of political viewpoint, but they were concerned. They were concerned about the rise in food deficiencies that they were seeing, partly as a result of this intolerance thing. And other things around different diets and dietary choices that people are making, perhaps without really being informed about the nutrients that they need.
Fascinating, Jane, and I would love to continue the conversation, but I know you have another appointment coming up quickly. It's just 56, so I'm going to, as I said, I get you home in time, no problem. So, Jane, if I usually at this time, ask people what their plans for the future, but I think you've given me a lot of that. So I just finished today on, if people want to work with you, want to know more about your school, what you do, or English UK, what's the best way to get in contact? We cannot connect it over LinkedIn. Is that the best way to? I know you don't check so often. You said to me, yeah.
I'm a shocker on LinkedIn because I'm trying to keep up with everything. WhatsApp, Messenger, LinkedIn. I've got clients the whole time sort of getting in touch by all of them as well. So LinkedIn's, contact me on LinkedIn, but forgive me if I don't get back to you immediately, because I get a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, and a lot of it's just sales stuff and so on. So we would be delighted to talk to anybody that would like to work with us or study here, or anybody that wants to know more about the UK or English UK. So Wimbledon is a great environment to work in. We really are a good school. We can prove it from our British Council inspection results. And the UK is a fantastic destination still. Everything is open. We're out there. We're having a lot of fun. There's a lot going on in London. The summer in London is brilliant. There's so much free stuff all the time, all different festivals and music and activities. So come to the UK.
Fantastic.
That's my final thing. We're here. We're ready.
Still here, and what a great representative you are. So all the information will be in the show notes about Jane's School and English UK. And Jane, thanks again.
Thank you very much, Philip. It's been great talking to you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast with Philip Pound. For more great advice and resources, check out eflmagazine.com. If you found this podcast helpful, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.